We are learning more about the ethics investigation into We Charity and the Liberal government involving a $900 million student grant program. And for more on that now, Abigail Bimman, who has been following the developments in Ottawa, joins us now. Good morning, Abigail. Thanks for joining us. So a parliamentary committee heard several hours of testimony on this yesterday from a minister and senior bureaucrats. What did we learn?
Well, there were really a few interesting points that came out of that testimony and still more questions that need to be answered. But Bardish Chagger, the Minister for Youth, Diversity and Inclusion, who is ultimately responsible for the program here, told committee that We Charity stood to be paid $43.53 million. That's more than twice what the amount that had previously been made public was. The government had been talking about $19.5 million. So that number certainly stood out. And then there was also a lot of information and more questions about the timeline into the affair. Senior bureaucrat named Rachel Warnick was grilled by members of the opposition. She said that she was the one who initially reached out to We. She did that on April 19th. That date becomes important in a moment. And she told them about the broad strokes of what the government had been looking for. The details hadn't been made public at that point. And she said that she learned that We had already been reaching out to government officials about a different program about youth and social entrepreneurship, and she learned that that maybe could be adapted to what the government was looking for. Then on April 22nd, the day that the Prime Minister made the announcement, Craig Kielburger himself, one of the founders of We, emailed her a very detailed proposal that day, and they moved forward from there. So as you can imagine, that sparked a lot more questions about the beginnings of this whole process.
Yeah, the plot thickens, and the Ethics Commissioner is now expanding his investigation into this affair. So who's on the hot seat now?
That would be Finance Minister Bill Morneau. So we know that the Ethics Commissioner was already investigating the Prime Minister. Now it's the Finance Minister. In a statement, Bill Morneau said he would fully cooperate with the Ethics Commissioner here, and then he repeated the apology that he issued earlier this week, saying that he should have recused himself from cabinet discussions involving We because his daughter works for the organization in a separate branch. We know that a second daughter of Bill Morneau has some ties to We as who she had spoken at some events there. So Bill Morneau declining interview requests yesterday, but saying that he was fully on board with the Ethics Commissioner's investigation.
And you mentioned the apology. We've heard a number of those this week, both first from Justin Trudeau, now Bill Morneau, as you mentioned, and now another one coming from the Deputy Prime Minister. What did she have to say?
Yeah, and that's interesting because what we heard so far were apologies from people with these direct links to We. But Chrystia Freeland said yesterday that the entire cabinet bears responsibility for the We affair, and she issued a very clear apology. So she said she wants Canadians to know that she's very sorry and that the government has made some mistakes here.
Yeah, interesting, and sort of trying to take ownership of this as a party rather than perhaps seeing it placed at the foot of Justin Trudeau and, of course, by extension, Bill Morneau. A lot of moving parts here, Abigail, so multiple investigations, studies. Where do you see this story going from here?
So today, the Ethics Committee is going to take a crack at this. Yesterday, all the testimony that I was talking about came out of the Finance Committee. Today, the Ethics Committee is going to be looking into more broadly the idea of how do we stop these conflicts of interests issues from arising, because this is obviously not the first time that the Prime Minister has run into issues with it. This is now his third conflict of interest investigation. So the Ethics Committee will be looking at that. Another big outstanding question is, will the Prime Minister testify at committee? Now, that's a highly unusual thing for a Prime Minister to do, but twice now this week in his public appearances, the Prime Minister has been asked if he will testify, and he didn't close the door to it, saying that his House leadership team was looking into the invitations on the table, and also that he was happy to answer questions in Parliament. So still waiting to hear whether he will testify at one of those committees, and we are not, the Prime Minister does not have a public appearance on his itinerary today, but those are a couple of things that we'll be watching as the story goes forward.
Interesting. And before we let you go, Abigail, I want to change tracks here for just a quick moment. The other big story coming out of Ottawa, the Prime Minister announcing $19 billion in funding to help the provinces restart their economy safely following the pandemic. So can you talk us through quickly how that funding will be allocated and any strings attached?
Right. So this is a big deal. This is money that the provinces, as you know, have been calling for quite some time. A deal that was long in the works. This announcement, in terms of strings attached, it's broken into 7 categories, 7 areas of help. So a couple of examples there. Money to help seniors in long-term care is a big one. Money for paid sick days. That's something the NDP have long been calling for. Contact tracing, testing, securing more PPE. All of these things are broken into these 7 different categories. So the provinces, according to the Prime Minister, have some flexibility in how they spend the money, but it has to be within these buckets or categories, so to speak, in terms of where that money actually goes. Also important to note that there was a specific mention in his announcement for municipalities, which we know are badly cash-strapped as well, and transit, and that money will be shared equally, or the funding will come equally from the provinces and the federal government.
Abigail Bimman in Ottawa for us this morning. Thanks, Abigail.